Okay, let's go. So, welcome to Luca. That's from Boundaryless and platform that it is like a startup that is working on platform design thinking. And today with Luca, we will address the sharing economy and also the platform related to sharing economy. I will leave the floor to you, Luca, also to introduce a little bit yourself and go beyond with your speech.
Yes. Thanks, Domenico, and thanks for inviting me to this very important event. So, you know how hard and how tough are the times now we are living into, and what's expecting us. So, what we are expecting in the next years. So, every time that we speak about this concept, now we always in the between. I don't know, losing every hope now for trying to build something that is leading to nihilism or deep adaptation. But we want always to have a little different approach, at least finding some way, something to do that can get us into the active part, the participatory part of the activities. I'm going to introduce myself in a moment and explain to you also what platform design, what is platform thinking in general, and why I believe now it's very relevant and pertinent to the topics that you are treating in this forum. Let me just start with a little context that, of course, I mean, you are perfectly aware of. So I will go very, very quickly now, but I just needed to build the logical flow of the reasons now why I'm presenting you the platform thinking and why and how platform thinking can help you, can help us and the entire world maybe to think to something a little more generative and not any more extractive and exploitative as we are unfortunately used to. So I think that you're all familiar with the terrible reports that scientists and institutions are releasing in these days now about how severe, how critical now is the situation about climate collapse. This is just one of the most recent. Now you know that IPCC is releasing reports every 6 years, but they had to anticipate the release that was forecast for 2022, if I'm not wrong, because they want to warn policymakers and citizens in general about what could happen if the global warming will be secured. That could be the most, we say, positive landscape that we have up front to 1.5 degrees of global temperature raise. There's more or less, by the way, you perfectly know that it's already secured. So we can't get less than this unless we start with climate engineering or something that is, I mean, also under study, and we don't know which could be the systemic effects, by the way. So even if we manage to stay here, and stay here means that probably we need to come back to a pre-1800s age of activities, no? So probably quitting about electricity and artificial light and power. So even if we stay in this now, you know how what could be the consequences. Now, in any case, we are going to continuously suffer from heat waves, drafts, or extreme weather conditions, extreme weather events. This is just a metaphor now that I'm using sometimes to explain clearly what these rays, this increase of temperature from between, I mean, 1.5 Celsius degrees or 2 degrees, as more or less is also likely a very probable scenario. A 2 degrees increase will lead to the probability to have a multiple breadbasket failure passing from 6% to 40%. You know, the breadbaskets are the areas in the globe where we are cultivating most of the carbohydrates, so wet grains, flour, no? That we're using for just directly to eat or just to feed the cattle. But in any way, it's related to human food and nutrition. But also, I mean, we are derivating some industrial products like syrups and other elements that we use in any case not to produce other kind of nutrients. So leading to a 40% of probability of multiple breadbasket failure will lead to a lot of serious things. I wouldn't say, because I mean, this is not true also scientifically, that will lead to the incapacity to sustain more than 40%, I mean, to sustain at least 40% of people around the globe. So there could be also to a severe reduction in the population. And I don't want to imagine and guess what could happen. And of course, this can impact on every one of us. But this is just an infographic now that's showing you that, for instance, if we come back to the Arab Spring 10 or 15 years ago, there is a correlation between the peaks of on the cost of the bread, probably caused by climate collapse, climate change related impacts and things, with the civil war fights, revolts that we had. So in any case, we are already living into the impact and the effect of the climate collapse. I mean, I give it this for granted because I know that more or less this is the central topic of the forum, so you're all aware of this. And we have other global risk reports, for instance, they were saying that all the second order impacts would have been into climatic, biodiversity, cultivation, agricultural effects, no, on the impact. But you know what? That, for instance, in this small circle here, probably you can't read it because it's there's very small letters, but it's infectious pandemic diseases. So this was not as probable. This report was released in mid of 2019, so before COVID outbreak of the pandemic. And you know how much was unlikely in terms of probability to happen respect to these other causes, and also what's the impact of these other effects regard to the pandemic. But now we are testifying, now we are witnessing what the pandemic did and is still doing, no, to our society. So let's imagine for real in the short term what would be the impacts of the next big things that they're going to happen more and more frequently. All these effects, by the way, at systemic level will lead to a kind of a waterfall amplification or exponential growth of these unlikely and unfortunate events. Think about it, something that will probably happen in the crop production, the crop failure, in the maybe unavailability of nutrients or food in general, is in any case, with a waterfall avalanche approach, is impacting to many other systems. That's because the systems in the globe are all interdependent each other. So the big lie we are living into now, with also the industrial complex, the industrial and pre-industrial age, was that we can isolate these silos and we can isolate this ecosystem, not pretending that they are isolated. For instance, I'm producing plastic and plastic bags because I'm just not seeing the impacts and the consequences, the liabilities of this way of doing and this approach towards other ecosystems, other systems in general. But then it's definitely not true, no? Because the production, the waste associated, for instance, just to plastic as an example, but we can multiply it several times in several different silos. Of course, is the main responsible. We are the main responsibles of the situation we're living into. So consider that an impact, maybe even a small, probably reduction in the crop production for the next 2 or 3 years will lead to a lot of consequences, like political destabilization, water conflicts, so people fighting to have access to water, drinkable water, or nutrients, or just food in general. And it's not something just about, okay, yes, I will spend something more to buy my food at the supermarket, because you could be likely in the situation where supermarkets are empty. I don't know if you're familiar with Roger Hallam, not one of the founders of the Extinction Rebellion movements. And he was a previous and former farmer, extensive farmer in the UK. And he started thinking about the consequences of climate collapse, and he started thinking about funding some civil movement, when he didn't find for 2 years in a row zucchinis at the supermarket. It looked like, I mean, a joke. And a lot of people was laughing now, because yes, okay, well, in UK this year we can't have zucchini. But he started thinking that, about the reasons why they couldn't find it. And it was because, for instance, the outdoor production of vegetables is not really sustainable, because it's too much subject now to this climate weather I would say shocks, no, that are more under that are not under our control. So the situation is this one, no? You know about that. Climatologists, scientists all around the globe. There is, by the way, 90% consensus between this position among scientists. So it's not really a debate. We are not saying that, yes, okay, someone is very alarmistic, someone is not. 90% of the scientists agree on this, so on what I just said. And of course, I mean, they could say it in a more articulated and objective and sustained by data way. But Kevin Anderson, for instance, is an eminent climatologist, says that in any case, now what is facing, what we are going to reach is not an easy adaptation. In any case, we are going to face an extreme adaptation. Then it's up to us to understand if we want to prepare ourselves for this adaptation, for these extreme events. So trying to do the max that we can do to prevent this, to try to smooth the consequences. Or in any case, I mean, the Mother Earth will force us to do something because they can't wait, and then they can't be really polite and accomplishing this. Examples, no? This is, for instance, a study from Hadzelili. She's a writer and a journalist writing on climate and sustainability. And she was projecting, for instance, in a kind of a what-if scenario, what does it look like if we need really to stay within the 1.5 Celsius degrees increase of temperatures. And I mean, just in a nutshell, no, she said that we need to get back to the pre-industrial age. So where the cycles and the routines are led by natural light, for instance. So we need to go bed when after the sunset. And we need to renounce, for instance, to any form of electricity or artificial power that is not 100% regenerative. And then the very difficult thing is understanding what is really regenerative, no? Because you know that also solar panels and they have an impact. Electric mobility, it has an impact, no, very important impact. So we don't want to hide the liabilities of this system. But having said so, let me explain. Sorry, my mistake. Why I'm here. I have a background as an engineer. I've been working in telecom industry for more than 10 years after my graduation in engineering. But then I start looking into how complex systems work, how they organize, how people are interacting each other, how businesses, with the broadest meaning of this term, are organized. So what really can do in terms of impact, if we want to stick to the profit metrics, the measurement, I would say, metrics and KPI, or there are other possibilities. And I start contributing since the beginning to this methodology that is released on the open source. It's called Platform Design Toolkit. And it's a visual design practice, framework, and methodology that is helping us designing platform intended not as products, not as specifically as digital platforms, but platforms in terms of orchestrators of resources, aggregators of resources, and I would say layers, infrastructures that are connecting producers of value with consumers of value, whatever we define producers and consumers and the definition itself of value. And then we also extended this, and I'm going to give you some more elements about this. We extended this in the past 2 years to the entire organizational design thing. So we derive a part of the model that is about saying, for instance, giving elements of platform thinking and this platform mindset. So looking at interactions and the relationship-centered design approach on how you can apply it to organization of any level, not only already established organization, but organization meaning that people wanting to organize and do something. And again, there are elements that they can, for instance, design. So you can introduce as a design practice, like working on cultural element, working on enablers, on the purpose, on aims of what you need to do. And these open source methodologies are pretty, I would say, well known and successful around the globe because we had more than 70,000 downloads of the methodology. So we proud to say that our methodology, given in under creative Commons by SA share alike license is really seen as a kind of market standard for this design approach. And why I think is really relevant? Because all this information, all these elements that I gave you before are leading us, to some important consideration that I consider as inputs for my design activity. So first of all, I mean, this pandemic let us accelerate on the deglobalization trend, because we know and we have seen that one of the main responsible probably of this such a huge impact of the pandemic is because we decentralize, we globalize everything. And that's not good, because we need to keep something important within the boundaries of our societies, within the boundaries of our states, for instance, or communities, that I prefer definitely as a definition. For instance, we have chances to shorten the supply chain on food and work more on locally grown food, or locally established initiatives like, for instance, artisans or handcraftsmanship and something like this, because we need to keep control of what the real economy means and looks like, and because we want to create this kind of, we want to have control on the impacts, on the consequences, on the liabilities of these ways of producing value. Matthew Smith, for instance, is an author, is a writer writing a lot on business model. I pretty like him. And he said, for instance, that as an entrepreneur, so looking the other flip of the coin, so this is the hard situation we are into, how we can really be protagonists, try to lead the change. Because you know what, the main important information I want to leave you, this is at least my personal opinion, is that we can't expect this change to happen top bottom. So we can't wait for the policy makers, the decision makers to drive us out of this situation, because this is not going to happen. By the way, no, it's very hard, it's nearly impossible at the level of physics that a particle inside a system can look at the system from the outside and can think, for instance, how we can improve the situation by leaving the situation and be responsible and part of this situation that we are generating. So in any case, we need to make an effort to think ecosystemically, but systemically, meaning that probably we need to realize that we are part of this, we are responsible partly of this situation, but we should be personally at individual level also the responsibles for getting us out of this situation as much as we can. I mean, no one has to be blamed, but everyone needs to do the maximum that we can do. And he says that this opportunity that now we are seeing clearly, also thanks to the pandemic. I mean, sorry for using this word, but this probably made this very evident to any one of us, is that from globalism to localism, this shift, this opportunity we have today, is one of probably the greatest broad-based entrepreneurial opportunity at individual level that, okay, in this case, America, because he's American, but I see the same for Europe and for all other continents around the globe. And the opportunities we have is about education, rethinking society, rethinking education, rethinking personal services, healthcare, distributed care and social care in general. Food is key. But not only food, also the way we transform in food, or in any case, how we deal with professionals, with technicians, with really the craftsmen and craftwomen that we are in touch with. And also we can also have some technological elements that now are helping us in the design and the redesign of these activities. For instance, tokens. Tokens are I'm not referring specifically to crypto tokens and to virtual money, but tokens in general, they are making it possible for us to consider economic and finance space as design space. So we can design these spaces. We couldn't do it before because we more or less had to just be passive, no? Against the absorption of the economic and financial market attitudes on our lives. In this case, we can take an active part and design them, for instance. Indy Jor, I think that you are familiar with Indy Jor, the founder of Dark Matter Lab, is working so much on, for instance, on the concepts of citizen entrepreneurship and participation. And he says that now the opportunity we have is that we can do a contracting on a many-to-many levels. So at peers level is not more a private contracting agreement from a central point of hub of this value and the target of the contract, but it's really a multiple collective dynamic and continuously changing sets of agreements. And this is changing the nature of the value or the definition of value itself we are considering. Just for instance, let me also drive you through some examples, and then I also have an example specific on the sharing economy and the circular economy, because everything that I said should be turned into the broadest concept of regenerating. So trying to be not exploitative, trying not to avoid thinking to the consequences and the liabilities of what we do. An example, the common stack, sorry. There is a series of sets, infrastructural elements, services that this group of people is introducing, for instance, to manage commons, like a kind of a series of services, best practices, guidelines, so that we can really define what a common is and how we can put this common as a new element of a new building elements for the activities that we are doing. Or there are a lot of cooperatives and platform cooperatives that can be designed with the platform thinking approach, of course, where you find objective ways, how can I say, practical ways and smart contract-based ways of redistributing the value that you're generating if you're working also in a non-monetary context. Given that maybe you're a volunteer, you want to, or you're just a community like an eco-village or in general a society, where there aren't pretty well established and pre-established relationship of value. With these methodologies and with these frameworks, now you can understand, for instance, how you can give back the value generated by the contribution of each one, proportionally to how much they contributed. In this case, this is an Italian cooperative that is producing energy. So the members of this community are either physically or virtually producing their own energy. They are investing in the community, and the community is repaying back everyone with energy. Green, of course, green energy. Other cases, Participatory City from London is a collective of people that are trying to create education, training opportunities, small artisanry opportunities, or workforce distribution, for instance, small tasks, small activities, maintenance, reparation, and something like this. And they are creating spaces in a district in London, in this case, where you can really go there and think, look at all the different perspectives of what you do and find maybe an ecosystemic approach that can lead you to regenerative and circular economies, for instance. There is an amazing video, but it's something like 4 or 5 minutes. So I prefer maybe to share it. I'll ask maybe the favor to Domenico to share the link with you. Other local communities, this is just a community I know this because it's very close to my, to the place where I live. They are trying, for instance, they are a community of farmers. They are trying to rethink the way agricultural is approached nowadays. And they are, for instance, bringing back to life ancient grains that maybe they are not useful anymore for the food industry because they need some high-tech, high-performing primary resources. But they are just trying to cultivate these grains and produce a lot of products that are healthy and with a very short supply chain. They were the product that fed their siblings, their relatives, since, I don't know, 60 years ago. So in any case, the human being has been fed by these nutrients, by these grains, I don't know, for centuries. So there is something wrong now and probably distorted in the industrial approach that we are adopting nowadays. Another example, just for instance, now this is Buurtzorg, is a platform cooperative around social and healthcare, distributed healthcare from the Netherlands. It's a collective of nurses and people, generally speaking, that is providing medical support, healthcare support to people that is at home and suffering from chronic or serious diseases. So they can't move, but they need daily help and support from the medical perspective. And therefore, they created this collective design with platform thinking approaches that it's transforming bureaucracy into software. So they remove bureaucracy, for instance, and they are all self-organized, self-entrepreneurs, and so they can be a really active partner responsible for the change to happen. And then we have also more, Google for a couple of days about this, but we are plenty of these initiatives, no? For instance, Timberland, that is creating shoes from recycling, for instance, recycling tires. Johnson Control, just an example, is recycling batteries. Aquazone turning waste waders into fertilizers. So this is much more technically speaking about the circular economy. Viga Circus is pretty interesting, no? Because they created a shared wardrobe for children. So given that if you are parents, you know now how often you need to throw away all the clothes that are maybe also new, but just because your child has grown up, and then you need to repurchase everything again, no? This is introducing a lot of wastes. And they said just a simple thing, for instance, no? They said, okay, given that probably you're going to use these clothes for a couple of months, 3 months, 6 months maximum, and then you need a different size, why are not we providing clothes as a service? So we are renting you the clothes necessary for you in that month, and then you give them back. We refurbish them, we recondition them, we clean them, and then we assign to another one. And this has also led them to create more, I would say, resistant and everlasting clothes. So not clothes that you pay maybe a couple of euros and then after 6 months you need to throw them away because they're full of holes and something like this, but they are designed and made to be very robust. Okay, and this is again reducing wastes and also introducing the good things of the sharing economy, no? Because you're exchanging. I mean, your approach is that since you need to give it back to the community, no, you are also treating these clothes in a careful way. That's important in terms of a message. So I'm done. I didn't control too much the timing, so I'm sorry, Domenico, if I just went a couple of minutes over.
No worries.
And I do apologize with the next speaker. Sorry. So.
Okay. We have time for one question, and then I suggest to use the question and answer, and then maybe at the end we will collect more questions. If there are some questions, I saw Sol that write in the chat. Maybe if you want to make a question, Sol.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm on the street listening. So I wanted to ask about platforms that you're aware of that can be either open source, or a tool that is like a template. Is that what you're saying in these examples for ways that we can shift from global to local and then kind of learn from each other globally?
Mm-hmm. Okay, yes, I think I got it. So, I mean, on the design of platform or strategies, so intended in terms of what a platform should do and how you can design it from, resonating with the ecosystem expectations, you can do that with our open source methodology. Because we believe that in any case, you can't design a new ecosystem, so you can't invent a new ecosystem. The ecosystem is already there. You need to understand the relevant entities, what they are trying to do, what they're looking for, which are the hidden potential of these communities, of these entities in general. It could be an individual, it could be a company, it could be an institution. And then you design what a platform strategy should do to sustain them, to support them and unleash this hidden power. And this is about the designing the features and the strategy that you want to invent, that you need to introduce in order to leverage the potential of the ecosystem. Then, if your question was also about, given that platforms are not specifically online, so online is just an opportunity, the digital thing now is just an opportunity because it's helping typically you to scale across or up. If you need to, for instance, if you need to create this platform, so implement a platform, given that you are thinking about digital platform, there are also open source approaches. There are even white label platform as a services activities, so share tribes, for instance, but there are a lot of different means that you may want to consider to start building your own platform. My suggestion is start always from a design phase, because even the most successful commercial platform that we are familiar with, like, I don't know, Airbnb, Uber, or Amazon, or also those that I mentioned on my last slide, have been designed. So it's not about the storytelling of the two people in the garage trying to invent because they are genius. There is a specific approach that you need to follow. And then, of course, I mean, the implementation phase is not that hard, I would say, because the features at software level, the platform have, they are not very, at least, I mean, for the validation and prototyping part are not that difficult.
Okay. Thank you very much, Luca. There are some other questions. You can use the chat also to respond eventually. And of course, at the end, we have a small space for further questions. I'll give the floor to Ray now, Ray Kiliho. Hi, Ray, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Let me just start my video 1 second.
Hi, welcome to the Climate Social Forum. It's a pleasure to have you here. So,
pleasure.
Ray is from Tanzania, right?
Yes, I am from Tanzania.
Okay, and he's also an entrepreneur. I'd give the floor to you, and you can explain a little bit the experience of Vijana and also the things that you are doing in Tanzania.
Great, thank you so much. Well, I appreciate this opportunity to be sharing with all these enthusiastic colleagues out here, and it was quite a lot of learning. I've been learning so much since all these webinars. So my name is Ray. I am from Tanzania. For some of you who do not know, Tanzania is a country in Eastern Africa, and for quite some time, I've been very much involved in conservation works. I would say for the past 17 years, I've been involved as a kid, as a young person, actually a young adult till today. And quite after that, I pursued my career in architecture and actually specialized in architectural technology. And having that background really about conservation and the understanding of the importance of taking care of our environments and the earth, I really I grew to tremendous interest in how our built environments really impact our environment. And so just before I share a bit about the initiative we are doing with my colleagues and my organization, I'd like to introduce just a bit about what we do. So Vijana Think Tank, Vijana is Youth for Swahili. It's a native language here in Tanzania. So we have a vision where we, to achieve a community where all young people have pathways for opportunity and a sustainable future. Now, in achieving such pathways for sustainable future in today's ecosystem and the economy, a lot of things come into play that anchor into achieving such pathways. And among those is achieving economic, is the part of economic empowerment for young people, but also issues of environment and climate change. Now, since 2017, we've been doing a couple of initiatives until in 2019, where we came into looking into a different dimension, I would like to share a few facts with you. Now, according to the World Bank and the UN, population globally, as you do know, is expected to grow to around 8.5 billion by 2030. And now, there's something that we quite often take for granted. It's where we live and where we work, where we do our stuff, the buildings. Fortunately, buildings consume about 1/3 of total energy globally. And also buildings contribute to at least 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, of course, the concern is buildings and buildings do not contribute in consumption of energy or contribution to greenhouse gases. But then buildings are as an attribute of our occupant behavior, how we interact with the spaces and how the built spaces are designed for our interaction is greatly how much impacts the environment into the extent of how much energy we consume as we use the spaces, but also how much fresh water we use. Now, according to various research, climate change could result into 100 more million people falling back to poverty by 2050. And this is, of course, attributed by many issues of food security and housing and habitats. And so until then, we came into a realization where while there's so much effort in trying to combat climate and conservation, this component of housing, which contributes to over 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions, is not quite looked at very seriously. Of course, some regions and some countries have an in-depth outlook onto it, but then the increasing demand for housing, because by 2050, as we've seen the statistics, there will be an increment of more and more people on Earth. This means we'll need more buildings and more spaces for work. At least we've seen a different perspective after the pandemic that there is more virtual, other like working from remote and virtual other than in physical spaces. But then this does not cut out the fact that we have to be at our homes. So buildings are still there. And so what we learned, especially for our country, is Tanzania, and my experience, something for me personally is, as a country, we're in the tropics. And we're in the tropics. The advancement of technology, architects tend to do a lot that we call table designing. That means most engineers and architects do not really study the environments and how the built environment can result into something meaningful as a habitat for the specific environment. And then two things come into concern in looking into this. One is energy demand is growing by more than twice the average until 2050. So there's so much energy demand growing. The second one is by 2025, it is estimated that we could be approaching water stress. So water stress is a phenomenon where the level of freely available fresh water, the demand is nearly approaching the availability of such water. And then by 2050, we could be approaching water scarcity, where the demand for fresh water, the number of people demanding fresh water is quite more than the available sources of water. So all three key things. One is buildings are responsible for too much energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. The second one is buildings are responsible for at least 15% of all freshwater consumption. That means we have to look into the attribution of buildings and our built spaces with how much they impact the environment. And so in the late 2019, we launched a program to intensify the adoption of green buildings in Tanzania. But then really, this is something that has been happening in a different scale in different countries. And then to do that, let me just share a screen of what we'd like to share. Just one moment, please. Yes, here. Yes. Right. So in this initiative, we are trying to understand the core foundation into how does buildings become environmental, um, like a great contributors to environmental pollution. And then the core reason starts at the beginning in the design process. And this is where we think we should also start focusing our energy on. Um, how individuals approach designers and designers. People look at two things. One is the functional requirements of their space. That will be that I'll need this space and this space into my house, or the building should have this space requirements. The second parameter is the aesthetics of the building, how beautiful it looks, and um, essentially the beauty of such environments. But then something that we would like to stress on and to remind is people are not very much concerned about um, how much impact does that space they're using impact the environment altogether. So when a house, people might think that's not a problem, but then 8 billion people, that's quite some tremendous impact. So if you look into the screen right here, calendry for most architects, this is a traditional design workflow where you start by reaching out to your expert and you share your requirements for the building. And then the architects or engineers would do the site survey, but then mostly the site survey is based on understanding the orientation of where the road is positioned, or like the neighborhood, the access to connectivity to sewage and fresh water. So that's basically what is being done. And then and on the process of the B model design, and that's the computer model, the design strategies are incorporated to integrate the functional requirements and the um, geographical orientation depending on where the road is positioned or where the water tap is, or a good view. And then the design is eventually completed, and then that's the end of the process. And then after this end of the process, depending on how intense the local authorities are, depending on how intense the building codes could be, that will detect what kind of requirements. And for instance, in with my local authorities, it's more of managerial organization that you observe the setbacks, the ratio of space between the built environment and the other environment into the site, how you treat your sewage to the sewer, or if you have sewage treatment and options right in your site. And that's it. But then what we do not see in this is, can we ask ourselves how much energy would my building consume in a year? And how would this quantify to how much impact I could have to the environment as a building owner? That is one thing that we'd like to bring into attention. The second one is consumption of water. We see many times that we like to have gardens and we have greeneries all over our spaces. But then what strikes us is the use of clean drinking quality water to water our flowers and gardens, while there are communities that cannot even access some clean water. So if we could use water much more consciously, it could help letting that water get to communities that are strongly struck by the effects of climate change and require fresh water as well. So these are the things that we would like to change and shape in how architects and designers and how as building users think and interact with our spaces. So the third phenomenon here is the embodied energy in materials. So this is the phenomenon where we look into how much environmental impact does the materials that we use to construct our buildings impact the environment. For instance, here in my country, to produce one bag, 150 kilo of cement uses about 100 liters of fresh water. So that means if you facilitate construction that intensifies the use of cement, so the cement production process consumes and uses too much fresh water. And so can we look into alternate materials that are sustainable and environmental friendly, dielectric and indirect? And so what we're pushing for in this initiative is to advance the adoption of green buildings in a certain way. So the next model here, so this is what we have been proposing and engaging with the local authorities to be as a standard model for architects in the design process. There's so much advantages into this. One of the advantages is not only it has a tremendous impact into how buildings have been contributing to environmental impacts, but also it makes living spaces much more comfortable. I would ask people, would you feel, do you find it okay during summer where you'll be sitting out in the under a tree shade, maybe drinking some cold, maybe cold juice? Would you like it that way? And then everybody would say, yes, that's a good thing to do. And then we would say, can we push for a mission where we can have built-in built environments just as much as comfortable as the outside? Because what we essentially are doing now is we build ourselves inside concrete boxes and then put a hole where we think, okay, we can let any air through here, and then we put another hole across the wall where we think we can go out through this space. But then we don't really look into how much quality of fresh air and reducing the dependency on mechanical ventilation. So just to take you on an understanding of this proposed intensification design process that we are working on to ensure it get adapted and to remind designers and architects. Unlike this model, so what is additioned in this one is we can see after having the site requirements, we think it's very important to have parameters where you can test and check for, because these are the parameters that bring about the understanding of how much impact in terms of energy and water the building consumes. So other than just checking the orientation of geographic orientation of the building, but also it's very important to check on the irradiation. This is how much exposure of built surfaces of built surfaces is exposed to the sun radiation. For instance, the choosing of solid paved surfaces other than having greenery surfaces on the compound, like having more gardens and having more spaces where you have trees and flowers. And checking on the issues of shading, like how much exposure is the walls of the building, how can we prevent direct sunlight to get into the surface of the wall, because the more heat the more radiation falling on the wall, it causes, of course, a transmission of heat from the outside to the inside, which also leads to the triggering of the mechanical ventilation and air conditioning to produce more cool air, because there's a sense of heat in the spaces. But then if we could prevent the exterior surfaces, the exoskeleton of the building from direct exposure to sun, it could tremendously reduce how much heat falls into the walls and tremendously into the building. Something else is the understanding of ventilation. This is basic, but then at some point it needs a little work. The understanding of the principles of air and the physics of air. One experiment that we did here is, for instance, the design theory for people, especially in my city, in Dar es Salaam, it usually gets really hot. For instance, as of today, it's at least 34 degrees centigrade. It's quite hot. And then, so the design theory for architects and engineers for a space where it would be, let's say, a living room of, let's say, 4 meters by 4 meters wide. If you place in that room, let's say, a window of length about 1.5 meters. So if you have a wall of 4 meters in length of 4 meters, a wall, and then you have a window of at least 2 meters. So that's about half the total area of the wall in terms of having that window. But then the design trends, people would choose convenient windows. They would opt for sliding sash windows. That would be aluminum sliding windows, or the UPVC windows. But then in paper, architects here would think having a window that is at least 2 meters in length, that is more than enough for a space, and a wall that is at least 4 meters in length. But then in practical, that does not happen that way, because the moment you have a sliding sash window, when you open the window, only half of the space is available for fresh air to flow into the space. Half of it is the part that has the glass panel. So this forces the users later on to opt for introducing a fan or having an air conditioning. And so the literal solution to that would be, how do you check how much air comes into the space? And then what kind of windows and the opening orientation would you propose? Let's say having the louvers or the open hinged windows would quite be effective in such kind of a design if you know how much ventilation you're expected to have in that space. And then after this design consideration by architects, and so the design is actually taking shape. And so the parameters that we want the local authorities to check, and also the clients, the users of such space, to understand and to ask the architects and engineers, is to show them the results of the experimentation in how much air velocity will be in each of the space, because this will determine if there is thermal comfort for the users in that space, or if the users will have to opt for alternative heating at times that are not extreme. So these are the parameters that they have to be checked by both architects and the engineers. But then we would like for clients and owners, building owners, to ask for this from the designers and developers. The quality, the extent of air velocity, consumption of water, fresh water, and fresh water, of course, and electricity. A good example to consumption is we have to be curious about what is the volume flow rate of our kitchen faucets, for example. How about the flow rate in shower heads, in our shower heads? We would look into temperatures. This is a component where we would look into the variation of temperature from the environments and the built-in environments, and then to see which times of year would be much hotter or much cooler or much cold. And then the other parameter is the check for comfort. This is attributed to temperature. So as architects, there are tools that enable architects to understand thermal comfort in a space and the relativity of the flowing current air and how that affects. The last component is the attribution of lighting, proposing how much natural lighting over mechanical lighting, because this contributes tremendously in the consumption of energy. And so the choice of technologies such as the sun tunnels, it's pretty cool technology where it traps the sunlight from the top of your roof into the middle of the house, where you cannot usually have a window or access to the outside. So you can have natural lighting on day. That is pretty good, other than opting for mechanical option to lighting. And so what we're pushing for is there's like some of our colleagues yesterday, as she was talking about the green climate financing. This is a very correct timing to be adopting green technologies. Firstly, for the environmental impact, but also the availability of financing for adoption of such green technologies. But also what we would like very much to push is for how do we create an economic model where the users and consumers of such buildings and houses require for these elements. People should ask for it. I challenge you to start considering on this. You should ask your architects, are you concerned about how much energy your building is consuming? And then what we would like to have after this is how do we leverage and incorporate this into our economic models? Because to ensure sustainability, that means we have to be concerned about generativity, but also it has to be a win-win situation for people as well. People would have to do it because they are concerned about the environment, but also they have to be at some point something in them for them in it, because if people are not going to see the advantage directly at some point, they're more likely not to be very concerned or take things very seriously. So we're looking into, can we fortify, and this is something that we're also doing in this initiative, and trying to intensify policy alignment for acknowledgement and rewarding. Let's say if a specific building, and there's a great green building certification provided by the World Bank IFC. The program is called Excellence in Design for Greater Efficiencies. This platform allows for input of building criteria and requirements and specifications, and then it measures the extent of how much energy and fresh water consumption, and then it gives you an option for intervening into such things. For instance, if you had specified a kitchen faucet that has, let's say, an 8 liters per minute flow rate, and then you would opt that to, let's say, half that, let's say 4 liters per minute. And then to get the certification, there has to be a check where before you get a certification, they can check that what you proposed in your design is actually what you've implemented in your construction. And then this is a certification to acknowledge the level of environmental concerning that you've put into your building. And then there is more and more into it. You can set 20% to 100% net zero buildings. If we've heard such these conversations from point to point about that. So the greatest challenge that we're facing right now is how do we fortify and increase the awareness for building owners and customers and users to demand for this level of environmentally concerned buildings? How do we create a community that demands for it? This will be very powerful, because if there is demand for environmental concerns in our built spaces, only then will the engineers and architects comply with the demands of their clients and customers. And then by doing that, we will be saving the environment indirectly, because we do not see pollution directly from our buildings. We very much often see industries when they release quite some green black smoke, but then we do not see it happening when we are in the comfort in our rooms, when we're sleeping in our beds. But then each action that we interact with our buildings contributes to the environmental concerns altogether. So this is generally around the initiative that we've been working on in trying to intensify green buildings, and I am happy to hear your thoughts on it. If you have specific questions or concerns, I'm happy to hear from you. Back to you, Domenico.
Thank you very much, Ray. Wonderful presentation. Congratulations and wonderful work that you are doing. So take the chance also now to eventually ask questions to Ray. And if you have some comments and so on, just raise your hand or eventually use the question and answer functionality. So you can eventually like raise the hand by the button that you have in on the panel of Zoom. And eventually, I have one question, but I would prefer before to ask the floor to the participants.
Yeah.
Okay, I will go in into my question. And my question is about, I don't know if you are also working in passive buildings, and which challenges do you encounter, for example, in implementing passive buildings? Passive buildings now are like one of the most researched methodology, technology also to create sustainable buildings. And for me, it's very interesting. I'm always been fascinated by passive buildings. I don't know. Also, I want to ask you a point of view on that.
Yes. Well, thank you. Yes, we, the whole point around green buildings, people usually confuse between green buildings and high-tech buildings. So green buildings are buildings that are environmentally concerned, as to say. And so, yes, it is passive buildings. The challenge that we have faced today and we continue to face is that people don't really see the relativity of why do they have to adopt passive buildings, because they usually correlate it with maybe it could be too expensive or why should I do it. So the challenge number one is building interest and building the awareness of environmental impacts of our interaction with spaces or our buildings into why we should adopt much more environmentally friendly buildings, and that will be passive buildings that of course reduces how much direct radiation and reduces um, the exposition of greenhouse gases altogether. So the challenge number one has been there is quite little understanding in why and how much extent do our behaviors in buildings contribute to environmental challenges. That is challenge number one. But then challenge number two, um, if we can create so much awareness for people to demand for passive buildings, if we can create that much of demand and awareness, only then that it can ring a bell for policymakers to put it as a requirement for the newly built buildings and houses. Because architects and engineers, in one way or the other, are responsible for tremendous environmental degradation, I would say, because if a building is not meant to be passive or environmental friendly, and then as architects and engineers have the power and the capabilities to understand all of these integrations and phenomena to why and how they can reduce the environmental impacts of the built spaces, the occupants would not know about it, because all we care about as occupants is we have the spaces and then their house looks beautifully. But then how much impact? This has to be either the occupants demand for it and they should know it to demand for it, but also uh, after it is becoming, and then the other way to push architects and engineers to incorporate these and these parameters into their designs and constructions, if we can integrate it as part of the building codes and the local and authority laws, that will be very powerful. So we are trying to create awareness both at government, local authorities, in understanding this is how much impact we're having from buildings. And then we're trying also to make awareness into the building users that this is how much impact you cause by interacting in this way to the environments. But then people usually don't care. And so the engagement with the local authorities would be to provide incentives. For instance, we are having a draft and there have been a lot of research around these areas, the materials that are rather very environmental friendly. And then we would like to see, would there be a possibility where buildings that are constructed using this much level of environmentally friendly materials would have this much tax exemption into the construction? So this can facilitate the adoption of this much passive buildings and construction materials. And so it is quite a new one here, because most of we're also having a challenge where most of our of the engineers in these local authorities have had the education a few years back, 10, 15 years back, where these technologies to simulate and quantify the impacts of buildings into the environments, most of these technologies were not quite available. So they did not have this understanding of the available potential. And so it's pretty new. So we're having quite of a challenge in trying to push this and for them to understand that this is very possible, and we can have more people. We can have more people adopt passive buildings. So it's around that, and then we're very passionate that the government is very responsive in trying to build the curiosity and trying to understand the dimensions that we're bringing and raising. And so we hope we'll be having the nationwide green buildings, advancing green buildings workshop in March or sometimes April next year. And this we intend to bring together the policymakers, the real estate developers, and the consumers to understand and explore and learn about all these potentials. So it's around that.
Thank you very much, Ray. If there are other questions, we have time for one or two questions more. Also, as I said, I will repeat also from the previous session, if there are in Arabic, we can translate from Arabic to English.
Great. That is
Okay. Last call for other questions. I have another one, but in the floor, yeah. Do you think that my question is about properly your work in Tanzania? So how difficult has been to introduce, for example, this concept of new buildings in your context? We, for example, in Italy, we are facing some resistance at the first time by the builders because they were used to construct in a classical manner, and they have not turned at the right moment to the sustainable building methodology because they were like frightened maybe to change and so on. And which were your experience in Tanzania about that?
So we face quite similar challenges, similar to the ones you've experienced in Italy. And the greatest challenge that we've seen here is we have to understand that private sector is very powerful in terms of driving the economic models of societies. And so what we see is a great drive to this. If we can make the private sector and companies and businesses understand the opportunities available in the Green New Deal, in how much opportunity is there for them in adapting into much greener and greener options and buildings, that way can push the adoption of these technologies, because people are concerned about two things. Either it will be too expensive for them, and of course maybe the businesses think they will lose businesses because they've been enjoying the boom into the classical construction and methods and methodologies. And so the challenge has been really to trying to get the ears of everyone. Like, this is the environmental impacts. What we are trying to do is not telling them you are this much bad, but then what we are trying to show, to rather show, is this is the opportunity of improving your business from how it has been happening for the past few years, which in this happening has been contributing to this much environmental concerns. And so there is so much opportunity in trying to change the modality of your business. And this is how much you can gain in terms of business opportunity. That way, we see more and more businesses opening their ears and attracting their attention into, we'd like to learn more of this. For instance, the opportunity with the green climate financing on yesterday's session. Part of the component that we've been integrating this solution is the availability of finance to adopt these new solutions and accelerating the green businesses. So GCF provides an opportunity for private sector facility where commercials can have grants or loan depending on all mixed instrument to construct green buildings, and that loan would be at least on a 7% interest, while commercial interest, if a real estate developer constructs here in Tanzania, the commercial loan would be interest at least 18 to 20%. Now, as a business, if you tell them this is how much you can do and there is a 7% interest loan where you can adapt this much green solutions, which are also good in putting you ahead of your competition in business, more businesses are turning to understanding like, we'd like to learn more about these solutions. And so what we think is speaking the language of businesses rather than speaking the language of, okay, this is how much environmental impact you've caused. And in that way, I think will be powerful in driving the agenda.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your answer, Ray. And
Thank you.
thanks to all for participating. Now we are closing the session of today that has been very fruitful. So thank you very much for your contribution. And we will start again at 2:30 with Paola Fiore, and the track will be socioeconomic impact. We will treat also the topic of climate and migration, and also women and gender and climate, together with Gramenos Mastroianni and Podra Klima, Bondwori, several guests that will join the discussion. So you are kindly invited, also you, Ray, and all the speakers, to join us today at 2:30 in Central European Time. Thank you very
so
much. Thank you, Ray. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for accepting. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.